Hello there, this is Carol King, the developer of Custom Home Builder Solutions, also known as CHS. This is going to be the first video in a series of videos about posting payables bills or anything that takes cash out of your checking account. When we talk about vendors in CHS, we mean anybody that we pay. It can be our trades or suppliers or overhead or even the bank for service charges, etc., and we will be getting into all of that. So this window here for posting new payables and charges from scratch is the most often used window in CHS, and the bookkeeper or accountant that sits there and entering bills is in a super important seat, because what I'm going to be showing you is how active that window is when you are posting job cost bills and giving you alerts about over budget or over POs, that you can drill down on the window as you're entering the bill to look at previous bills entered and what was budgeted for that, and determine what cost code might even be needed when you're entering. I'm going to head towards saying that you should stop routing around all of those bills to be approved by the field, because I will be showing you how the field can get online and see bills that you've entered and posted as unpaid, and then they can approve bills for the job costs for the jobs that they're assigned to. The field usually can't see all of the overhead bills. The big boss can and approve those so that the bookkeeper later knows what to select to pay in a check run. The window to add new payables bills is probably, like I said, the most often used window in CHS. It is the hub of a job costing system and is specifically designed to alert about those overages, about vendor insurance expirations, outstanding waivers, and other notes that you've written to yourself about the vendor. It has many places to drill down on information about the vendor or about the job costs and the job that you are entering a bill for. That person should be trained to use all of the tools in CHS so they can keep the owner or project managers informed about potential overages and other trades or suppliers issued. There are other options here, which we will be getting to in other videos, for posting bills right away from work orders that have shown that the work is done, or from recurring bills like paying your repeated rent, office rent or something, or importing a bunch of credit card charges maybe from Excel. And it gives you a hint about if somebody has already written the checks, a manual check out there, and how to post that, or general bank debits which are already paid, or credit card charges, etc. right here. This video will be focusing on selecting the vendor that you're going to be posting the bill for, or invoice if you prefer to call him that, and the various alerts that you will receive about that vendor when you select the vendor and when you open the window to post bills. So let's click the From Scratch here. The Post Vendor Bills or Expenses window is for selecting the vendor that will be paid or has been paid already. The cursor will be in the field to select the vendor from a drop-down list. You can start typing the vendor code in the field and you'll see the list narrow down to things that match, and you can select the vendor. So I selected ABC Foundation, and you'll notice that some things appeared in an alerts box over here, and we will get back to that in just a moment. But it goes out and it looks for some things to have happen and display, and looks up stuff about the vendor or supplies stuff about the vendor as soon as I select this. And we will be focusing on the vendor. Now I have gone home and I have clicked on Jobs List and Setup and opened it in a tab up here so that I can refer to it quickly. And I also did, let's collapse that one, I also did Vendors List and Setup and opened it in a tab right here. That's because I may want to refer back to these two things while I'm creating bills, or at least while I'm doing this video. But notice that the one that we opened for selecting a vendor is called Create Payables Bills, and we can jump right back to it. Now there could be a little issue with keeping this open and then going and making changes to jobs and vendors list. So it's a good idea actually, because these bills are going to react to things for how you've had the job set up or the vendor set up. It could be a good idea to actually close and reopen this. So right after I selected ABC Foundation, there's a pencil edit icon that showed up here for me to open this vendor's setup window. But first I'd like to show you that if I click, we'll come back to all of this, I'm just doing this real fast to show you something. I click to do a job related bill, And one of the first things, or the first thing that happens, is CHS checks for expirations, etc., and lets you know about them. But one of the things it checks for is whether this vendor is marked for a payment discount deduct. And I notice that and I go, why is that happening? They don't give us a payment discount. So I decide maybe I better go edit the vendor. So I'm going to close this and just close this for a minute. And I'm going to click the pencil edit icon for editing the vendor. And I am told that this is just an FYI, and it has information about that across the top here, that you should close and reopen this window. When you are working on the web, it is bringing in information to your computer, and there's times it should be calling back to refresh some things if you make some major changes. But if I continue here, I notice that I did put 2% discount over here, and I think, no, I don't want that here. I put it here just so I could demonstrate to you. And I tab, and there are other videos about setting up vendors and all of these fields over here. But see how I'm jumping to this straight from the window where you select a vendor to pay bills. And I save this. In this case, it'll be okay that I didn't close and open this. Notice that if I click this again to do a bill, it does not have that line about that they offer a discount anymore. So there's a few times you can do some updates by editing the vendor, but it's still my strong advice that if you're going to do much about editing the vendor, that you close this window and just go to the vendors list, or if you open this and edit it, then close it and reopen from scratch to come here, just to be sure everything gets really refreshed. If you select to set up a new vendor over on the vendors list by adding a new vendor all of a sudden, and you add it in here, let's just play like I'm doing one as fast as I can here. We'll call it test and test vendor, and I add it here. It opens the window then to fill in all the rest of the stuff about that, but we're not going to do that right now. And if I go back to create vendor bills and expect it to be in here, start typing test, it's not in here. But if I close this window, I go back to home and I open from scratch again. As this window opens, this drop-down list gets refreshed, but not any other time. So now my test vendor is in here. So that makes the point about how if you do go set up a new vendor and then you try this drop-down and it's not in here, that's why. You need to close this. We do not want to be doing this drop-down list and have it say loading to bring in all the vendors. We want it to do it right up front when you open the field. Now let's do that ABC again. Get it on the screen. And it also tells you that alerts for general liability or workers' comp expirations will only be available on the window to create job-related bills. So when you click this, it's taking a little time to go out and check for things. But if you're not going to pay them for something that relates to a job, you could use this quick bill button instead of the job-related button, and you won't be selecting jobs, and it won't be taking time to go look for expirations. Mostly, you use this button when you're entering telephone bills, utility bills, your rent bills, various things that have nothing to do with a job or with job costs. So you'll use this so that it doesn't take the time to check all that stuff about jobs. It's very valuable that it does check all this stuff about jobs, but we don't want to have that happening when we're entering overhead bills. And we're going to select an overhead vendor in just a second. Over here is a used button. And I can see all sorts of things about ABC Foundation. I can see purchase orders for ABC Foundation that have been issued to them. I can see actual job costs that have been posted for them and get a report of that. I can see all payables bills, even ones that were not related to job costs here. I can look at vendor expirations, what's expired, which we've been going over quite a bit of that stuff. And we on purpose have this vendor with a lot of stuff expiring. I can see waivers of lien tracking, and I can see who has not returned their waivers of lien right there. I can see uploaded documents and photos in the file cabinet for this vendor. I can see scheduled tasks. I can see notes I've written to myself. And most importantly, by clicking the used, if I have a bill in front of me and I'm getting ready to post a bill, I could click that used stuff and right away see their contact information and maybe any other contacts we've set up, like here's the bookkeeper and her extension, that kind of thing. So you can get to that real quickly if you have a question for them. This area right here about vendor comments we've gone over extensively, and I'll show you some comments happening, but you would use this button to see all comments that you have sent to this vendor or referred to this vendor or that kind of thing. That's what it's counting right here, is all the comments that have referred to that vendor right there, and you can review all comments back and forth between you and the vendor, between you and some other user in CHS, etc. And we'll see it some as we go through these various videos about posting bills and how comments show up and how they're used. Right here it says only 10 rows will be allowed before submitting new payables records. That has some to do also with the fact that we're on the web and that CHS is very dependent on you keeping your internet connection going. But if you lose connection for some reason due to your internet provider, or you've opened too many tabs and you've just run out of memory, or you've opened too many other programs, this and that, what I'd like to do is make sure that you don't go in and enter like 30 lines before you submit them, because when you click this button to enter various lines of bills, it's just on your own screen until you submit it. So suddenly you lose an internet connection and you've entered all these things, but they never were submitted to your database, and you lose connection. That can be trouble. So I'm trying to make it a little easier. I have had that happen, and that's why I did this a couple of times where people said, well, I entered 50 lines, and I'm like, oh no. And then they lost their connection, and because you are sitting on your own computer when you enter bills and you don't get it submitted, you'd have to come back and enter those again. This explains all of that right there, basically what I just said. So you could click that to see why you are limited to 10 rows and what to do if you are entering a whole bunch of maybe the lumber bill entries or something that you enter a lot of lines for, is that you should enter, it'll tell you when you've reached 10 lines, you should post those as unpaid to pay later, even if you're getting ready to do a check right now. Then come back in and enter 10 more lines, post them as unpaid, and then go to the unpaid payables window, select those records to pay, and then either post or print your check. I'm going over everything on this window about vendors and what things you should read about and understand as you're entering bills. The other thing down here is that there's a warning. Make sure only one person is posting, selecting, or paying accounts payables bills at a time. There's a reason for that. So you can imagine somebody being on the unpaid payables windows and selecting bills to pay, check marking them to pay, and getting ready to do a check run. What if somebody else was on that window selecting bills to pay too? When you click to do your check run, you might have some checks in there you didn't expect because there was another person working at the same time. So that's the most important place, that you should make sure that only one person is selecting bills to pay at a time for a check run. But it can also be kind of disturbing for somebody to be on the unpaid payables windows and somebody else is over here just entering new bills or doing something about bills that may even affect that bill, and have those just show up when that person is just trying to study the bills that are there at that time that they're getting ready to print checks. And a tip for speed is if you have been working in CHS for a while, it can help data entry speed to log off, which is this thing up here. Close your browser down completely with the red X, because if you've opened a lot of things across here, all of that stuff is taking up memory, so you shouldn't just log off and keep this browser open. You should log off and get this browser closed all the way down. Browsers can slow down over time, especially if you stay on CHS for quite a long time, and if you haven't followed our instructions to tell your browser not to track history, you could be slowing down quite a bit as you go because it's trying to remember various things that you've done. So even though it takes a moment to log off, then reopen your browser, then log in again, the difference in speed that you'll get by refreshing everything by closing down and coming back in will be worth that moment of doing that. And this is only if after you've been working for quite a while and you notice that you are slowing down. It's actually not necessarily our server slowing down. It's various things going on with all of your data entry if you're tracking history and things that you have open. So what we're going to do in all these various next videos is talk about how you can be a hero to your builder. That you should pay attention to all of the tools that are on the payables screen, giving you warnings, all of the alerts that are set up over here that you've done, and use all of that information, including the stuff about job overages, jobs being over budget when you enter a bill, things like that, and use the tools to write a note or a comment to the people that will be approving bills or asking the vendor a question, etc. By monitoring and drilling down on the things that we will show in the next video, the tools on the Payables screen, you will be a hero by noticing that something is over or not. Also, we are trying to head you towards not having to route all those bills around to be approved, again, by the project managers getting lost in their truck or on their desk and you're waiting for them to come back. We highly encourage that you enter bills as they come in, because they are going to show up on places where people can monitor where the overage is heading, even if it's not been paid yet. If you enter a bill that's higher than what was budgeted, people in the field can see that that cost is heading over as soon as you enter the bill. Plus, they can go on and start approving the bills to pay, and the field, even though they can't see overhead ones, will be looking at job cost ones, and they can correct a cost code right there. That's about all they can correct is the cost code. But you also, if you use purchase order systems, will be able to just select a PO and have the right cost code drop in. So again, there's a plug for using purchase orders. Whether you send them out to the actual vendor or not, you can at least issue a purchase order so that the back office entering bills can look at purchase orders issued to that vendor and see what cost code, because it'll probably match that. That's a lot of information, but all of this stuff on this screen should be paid attention to. Now let's real quickly talk about how we suddenly got some information over here about activities and alerts. This is basically notes that you've written or added as an activity to do and left them as not marked as done. So we have need IRS W-9 form, and that there's something about a leak going on here. I'd like to change vendors for a minute to Big Buck. And notice that we have a note that workers' comp is expired. I'm going to do something to add something about general liability being expired here in just a second. But we also got, besides create job related bill and create quick bill, that there are open POs for this vendor. So related to this vendor, we got some additional information, and because you can create bills from POs, it's already filled in for you here to go to the POs and cost management window, which you can go directly to and look at a whole bunch of jobs. But this is open to just show us Big Buck and the POs for that. Now notice that this PO is done. It's 0, so we don't need to be doing that. But we could create a bill from this one. We could create a bill from this one really quickly. We will be showing that about posting bills from POs. But I will tell you that if you click this Create Bill, everything on that Add New Payables window will be filled in for you, and you can just take care of it that way. There's another place to select a PO right on the window, but we'll get to that later. Just wanted to show you the other thing related to the vendor that shows up here. Now let's click for Big Buck to do a job-related bill. I'd like you to notice that not only do we have a thing about their workers' comp being expired, but we have send request and do you want to deduct for general liability being expired. Now I've noticed that we are doing this video on March 30th, 2021, and we actually have general liability expiring on something like March 28th, 2021. That's why we don't have a note about this yet. So now we notice, oh yeah, I guess it's expired and we don't have a certificate for them. So right now, one of those comments I can create that I talked about being a comment is send a request to vendor for general liability certificate. It opens up what we call a comment that is already ready to send to Big Buck, and I might also do it to the project manager, just because, so that they're aware that Big Buck doesn't have their general liability up to date. I can click the button to send it, and this will be sent out to the vendor, and then they will have instructions for how to reply and upload their general liability insurance certificate, and we will receive notice on the launch tab that that has come in, and there will be a link there where we can get the new liability certificate attached and then update the vendor. But that's what I would want to do right there, is go ahead and send this to them about that. I'm actually going to delete this because I'm not going to get all involved in the rest of this in this video. But notice how I noticed that. And if I close back to these activities here, I could do new activity, and I won't mark it as done, and I'll just start typing general liability because we've already set up a group for that as the main heading about general liability expired, and it has big buck in here and everything already, so I will submit that. It is in the list. So the next time I select big buck to enter a bill, I'm going to see this and I'm going to see this, and if I wanted to edit it and mark it as done, I could when I receive the liability certificate from them by clicking this and then marking it as done. We have other videos about general liability, uploading their certificates, entering their expiration date, etc. Now I'd like to show you an overhead bill. Let's do City of Austin, which is who we pay utilities to. And notice that we've set up 4 different vendors for that. One for paying for our office stuff, one for job related, and another one that is for rental properties. Let's first click City of Austin Office. What I'm making a point is you can set up more than one vendor, and the reason you'd want to is because of the various things that will drop in related to the vendor based on how you set up the vendor. First of all, notice that I created an activity over here. And I'm pretending like this is a sole proprietor working out of their home right now. So I made a note saying put 30% of this to overhead and to the GL number this, and 70% to the owner this. If I look at how this is set up, you can see that I gave it a default of $8,700, which is an office expense for our company. That's not the personal part in an overhead. And it doesn't have a cost code because it's not job related, but that I also did some entries down here to tell me about that. What you're telling yourself in this case is when you enter the bill, let's do that. But what I'd like to show you is that I can do 0.3, in other words 30%, let's say the bill is $75, and notice that it is only putting $22.50 for the total based on 30%. And that overhead dropped in our department overhead and $8,700. Then I'm going to copy this. I just copied this just because, and now I'm going to put 0.7 in here, and I have 52, and notice net due is 75 for both these lines, but I'm changing this to owner department because that's the instructions I gave myself, and I gave myself an instruction to use owner equity 2950. If you look at the activities and notes again, to do only, which you can see right from the screen, it says 30% to GL 8700, and that's what dropped in for us, but we need to type in our own information for the second line and 70% there. So you're telling yourself to do that, to split that into 2 places. I'm not submitting this, we're not going over all the fields there. Now I'd like to do City of Austin rental properties and just show you something. We have no alerts about that, and it will be job related because we've set up rental properties to be job related. But notice how it dropped in PM as the department, and it dropped in this GL number 3680 for rental utilities, so that all of that is ready for us, and that's based on how the vendor is set up. It dropped it in, and it dropped in the GL number for us. If I do the one that I say is job related, City of Austin for jobs, you're going to see that the GL that dropped in is the work in progress account that we told this particular vendor to drop in because we are planning that we will be posting these 2 jobs, and it supplied a cost code, a default cost code based on how that vendor is set up called electric service. In this case, you need to pay really close attention, but maybe you might have electrical permits or something like that, and you might want to change it to that under various permits. But just be aware that this is what drops in based on what's set up for the vendor, but that you can select something else right now, and that you could set up different vendors. You don't have to set up just City of Austin one time. You can do some things to use the defaults that will drop in for you when you set these vendors up. And the other tip I'd like to give you, in CHS, you can post various bank debits. Maybe you've been using a debit card to go to restaurants or to get gas, or you've been using a credit card to go to restaurants or to get gas or to stay at hotels. I have a strong suggestion that maybe you set up vendors like gas instead of vendors like Exxon, Shell, Texaco, whatever those those vendors are. You don't want all of those vendors set up probably. So you can just set up one like gas, for example. Do your quick bill because it's not job related maybe. And notice that it's going directly to overhead and to vehicle expenses because that's how we set that vendor up on their setup screen. So you might have one called restaurants, and maybe you have restaurants dash travel and then restaurants dash entertainment or something like that. And you set them up for different GL things. Right here, like I said, you can look at how you set up this vendor. And that's where you give it that default department OH and the GL account and a zero cost code, meaning it's not going to be going to job costs. I'd like to show you one more overhead one, AT&T, for your phone bill for the office, but you might have also, like I said, AT&T for the field, who knows, some additional ones. But notice how I set up for this default GL number, telephone, to drop in, for it to be an overhead department, it's not job costing, and that I also did a default description for a payables bills called ATT-office phone bill. So notice what happens because I set it up like that. Let's do another quick bill. Look how much is filled in for me is the department, the GL number, and again, pay attention to these fields. Maybe this time you want it to another GL number, but all I have to do, and usually you give it 6 digits for the date on an ATT bill because they don't have an invoice number, but the description's there, and all I have to do is get over here and do 145 and submit it as unpaid or pay it, or that it's been paid, or that's paid by a credit card, or whatever it is. But I had to only fill in this and the amount because I had told it to drop in this default description. I'm not typing in a description or anything else, and therefore it's that fast. So I think that's all I wanted to cover in this video. I was really wanting to focus in on the vendors setup, and paying attention to how you set up your vendors and how much that can help you towards getting alerts about their expirations, about other things, whether they provide a discount, and that how you set up the vendors is going to really control what happens when you're entering bills over here, and that you can do some things to help really speed you up while you're entering bills. So thank you for watching. The next video is going to be about the various alerts and things that you can receive when actually posting the bills on the Add New Bills and what you can drill down to and see. So have a great day.